Nishant, at long last, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. I've been following the Bitcoin in Asia podcast for a while now, and I'm glad to be able to contribute.
Oh, for sure. Hey, that's a great introduction. I like it. And for those who aren't quite familiar with you yet, they'll become more familiar with you. But can you start out with just kind of a brief intro of yourself, some of your history in the space, and kind of where your career has taken you over the past few years?
Sure. So I joined the space in 2014, working in the Bitcoin miner making sector full time. And then when the 2015 market crash happened, that company we were working with went bust because we couldn't keep with the rising difficulty and the market crash. And so I joined the leader in the space, which was Bitmain. And since then, it's been a roller coaster ride through the Bitcoin scaling debate, a lot of other PR battles that Bitmain was involved in because of its influential role in the space. And it grew very fast, like one of the fastest grown tech companies in the last decade, probably the fastest. Its rise to, from 100 employees when I joined to 4,000 was crazy. Got to learn a lot from the space, got to learn a lot from being in the Bitcoin scaling debate and all the open source, all the battles that go on in open source democracies that cryptocurrencies have become, not just Bitcoin, Monero, Siacoin, Litecoin, so many. I got to learn a lot, and then I started my own firm.
For sure, that's the brief. And then so 2014, obviously pretty early, and your work, you started essentially a mining company at that point. You touched on it, but it was a mining company. Fierce competition, especially in China. Then I believe you're in Shenzhen, and then you joined Bitmain at 100 employee size after that.
Yeah, the competition was fierce, not just from China, but US. I think they were geographically distributed, the miner makers back then. In fact, ASICS, the idea of ASICS started in the US. The very first companies that talked about ASICS, I think the first one was HashCash, who talked about an ASIC chip for Bitcoin mining. And interestingly, the first company that I worked for full-time in the space was using HashCash chips, which HashCash couldn't capitalize on very well. So during HashCash's liquidation, we purchased those chips and we started making miners from those chips. High-end home-focused miners. I mean, for home use, they were silent, using liquid cool, proprietary liquid cool technology. It was a great ride, and we delivered a lot of miners, unlike a lot of other companies at the same time.
Yeah.
So I don't know if the viewers know it, but this is interesting to know that in 2013, there was this proliferation of ASIC makers all over the world, especially in the West. Because everyone saw the analogy with the California gold rush. Everyone thought that, that the tool makers will make more money than the gold diggers themselves. And so everyone started trying to make ASICs. But not everyone survived because of a lot of challenges that no one had foreseen. And no one had foreseen such short product development cycles because the Bitcoin difficulty is rising so fast. Within 3 months, your machine becomes obsolete. You need to come out with the next gen chip. That had never happened in the history of semiconductors. No company does that, come out with a new chip, put it to market within 3 months, and then come out with the next one within 2 months more. No one could keep up. But some players emerged and just evolved eventually.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And maybe a little bit more color on kind of how those winners emerged and how Bitmain, kind of in your perspective as an outside observer at first, kind of became that leader in China early. Even, that sounds small now, but at 100 employees, Bitmain was large and, relative to the industry at that point too. Maybe a little more color on how Bitmain got to be that position at the time that you were starting to join.
Oh, yeah. So Bitmain wasn't surely the giant in the Bitcoin space that it became later at the time I joined, because there were still other miner makers, and there were some very competitive ones, including Spondoolies in Israel. There were still some ASIC miner machines people were using, although FriedCat, the founder, had disappeared. There were still some Avalon chips and miners that were fairly competitive. But Bitmains were just emerging to be the most competitive with their S5 miner. After S5, S7. S5 is when they started making one of the most competitive chips or miners. And S7 is when they started rising to glory, and S9 is when their position was established for good. So yeah, it was on that path. And insiders knew that they were on this path, but outsiders didn't even know there was a company called Bitmain. Yeah, this was before Jihan came on social media, on Twitter, and started talking in the grid scaling debate, and people got to know what Bitmain is. They own Antpool and all these big mining pools, and who is Jihan, the founder. So yeah, this all happened around the same time that I joined Bitmain.
Yeah. And so you joined. What's your role initially when you joined?
When I joined, I was supposed to bring the oomph in the miners. Like the miners did not look very good compared to other competitors who eventually went bust because they were focused more on looks, I guess, than performance. So my job was to market them very well outside China and improve the brand's image, which was not very existent. It was all based on the efficiency of the chips. So that was my initial role. And at the same time, Bitmain was also diving, or Jihan was diving into the block size debate. And so my role changed rapidly soon after I joined.
Right. And so you essentially end up being kind of head of global communications there for a number of years. Maybe kind of give us some context for what, there aren't many kind of Western facing employees inside of China at that time, maybe a couple handfuls. Give us some kind of color on what it's like to be that Western facing, kind of communications role inside a company like Bitmain, a pretty Chinese company, not a ton of outside employees. Talk a little bit about that kind of atmosphere and kind of navigating that, I guess, for those early years.
Yeah, that's an interesting question because Bitmain is, as you said, a traditional Chinese company in many ways, like the work culture, etc. But on the other hand, it also combined a lot of characteristics of young crypto startups because the company was young in every way. The founders were very young. Most of the employees were young. And it was a very crypto company in a way because Jihan was a big crypto believer. He was like one of the first cypherpunks from China. He's the guy who translated the Bitcoin white paper. So all of this reflected in the company culture as well. So it was kind of torn between these two. And this was still when it was smaller. So Bitmain was torn between these two kind of cultures. And I guess I fit in more in the crypto side of things, whereas some other foreign employees and colleagues, they were working in not so customer facing roles or working in jobs like chip design or sales. And they were not so involved in the crypto part of it or the crypto discussions that go on because their job did not require it. So that made my role unique in this way because I was involved in all the crypto conflicts going on, so many of them going on at that time. Yeah, so it was, like I said, it was challenging and no one in the world had been in my role because there was no other big company as big and influential and impactful in the industry as Bitmain. When I say impactful and influential, I just don't mean in terms of PR. Bitmain wasn't very influential in terms of PR because that's not what they focused on, but they made very efficient chips because of which they become an integral part of the Bitcoin technology or the Bitcoin network. So anything they did affected the whole ecosystem. And that is how they were influential and impactful in the industry. So every decision had to be made with a lot of care of thinking about the long-term effects on the Bitcoin ecosystem and on the community. So what I was responsible for, all the responsibilities were very unique. No one, I guess, in the space had to deal with such responsibilities ever before, or ever again, sure. Because there has been no unique influential company, influential in the way I described, ever again.
Definitely unique time, in Bitcoin and Bitmain. Obviously, one of the more unique companies in that time. Interesting time to be there. You touched on kind of the company culture there. Can you talk a little bit more about how you saw that company culture change as it went from 100-person company to a 4,000 person company, and essentially your responsibilities remained, similar, and the scale of kind of the kind of magnitude of the importance of what you're doing grew, but you're still running kind of that, from that 100 to 4,000. Talk about that growth a little bit and how company culture changed during that growth.
That's a very good question. So as I informed, there were like two cultures the company was torn between, and it could be torn between because it was still smaller and evolving very fast. But when it grew very big, when it was like almost more than 3,000 employees, and almost 4,000 at one point of time, it couldn't afford to just be torn between these two cultures. And it couldn't also afford to be just like a crypto company where things are less organized and things are more agile. These things tend to suffer when you become more established, when you are more process driven, and you start adopting industry standard time-tested processes. So it became more of a traditional company then when it became that big. And I, like almost all employees at that time, also experience some frustrations that any small company that becomes a traditional and big company face. I mean, employees in all such companies face similar frustrations. We face some of the same. Yeah, that is how the company culture changed.
Sure. And you're kind of touching on how process-wise, operationally, Bitmain was kind of growing into a more traditional style, I guess, which is necessary as you scale to a size like that. On the other hand, it's at the same time getting kind of into ideological battles that most traditional companies wouldn't get into. Bitcoin is obviously a different, different playing field than most traditional industries. But so there starts to be kind of some ideological battles that you touched on earlier. A lot of controversy around Bitmain, and you're in kind of a tough spot as the communicator for Bitmain's kind of, internal, thinking and strategy around this stuff. Kind of give us some context for, what you're thinking at that point, maybe some around the decisions that were made and kind of your take on how things turned out, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for asking that. There are a lot of things to share, but I'll keep it brief in this call. So there's another aspect of Bitmain's culture, which is, or especially when it comes to communication with the crypto communities that we operated in, which is that it's also a Chinese company. If we were an American company, it's everyone in the company, every function of the company understands how to deal with PR better than otherwise, because China is very different in terms of communication than the rest of the world because of the social political realities of China. So that made Bitmain that put Bitmain in a very tough position, because now we are dealing with this very radically transparent communities, which evolved from the open source movement of the 80s / 90s. And then there's Bitmain, a Chinese company, where open source movement never took off like in the West, and where transparency by design within the social political system is not considered very important. So almost all functions of Bitmain were not able to adapt to the kind of communication requirements or needs of Bitmain in the cryptocurrency communities. So that made my role very challenging. So I spent more time, most people wouldn't imagine, but I spent more time with trying to persuade different functions of Bitmain internally to step up to the plate than I did fighting battles outside. So that took more of my energy than battles outside. Now that was something very interesting. And that is also something that continuously kept unconsciously bringing up in my mind the need or the gap that existed in China in PR. So other companies would also face similar issues when they become equally impactful in the cryptocurrency space, which eventually evolved into my decision of starting my own firm later.
For sure. And so you did decide to kind of step out on your own. You saw a need there, and now you're essentially kind of work with some of the biggest brands, biggest companies in Bitcoin mining as kind of a communications guru. You know, you have kind of a selection of large clients. Talk a little bit about that decision to talk a little more about that decision to go out on your own and kind of that gap you're looking to fill and some of the ways that you've started to, I guess.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because what I described, what eventually evolved into my decision to start my own firm, it was just part of it. The major reason of doing it was when we were scouting for a PR firm at Bitmain. We tried boutique firms who took pride in being crypto experts. Turned out their own experience and network and resources and knowledge was way lesser than my own. And so they were not useful for us. And then when we went for bigger firms, including the world's biggest PR firms, they did not have the crypto expertise that we needed. And we needed more strategic advice because of the kind of unique challenges we were dealing with. Not just, you know, our motive was not just to get our brand out there, which seemed to be most of the need in the cryptocurrency industry at that time. You know, this was the 2017 boom. Most projects want to just be more popular than other projects and capitalize on all the crypto hype. So that was also what tailored most boutique PR firms to offer those kind of services. And that's not what we needed. What we needed was something more strategic, which requires a deep understanding of the industries that we operate in, a deep understanding of our business, deep understanding of the beliefs that drive the cryptocurrency communities that we operate in. And so after working with one of the world's biggest PR firms, I realized that there was this big gap in the industry of subject matter experts in the PR side. People who have been working for decades in the industry. Nothing like that existed for cryptocurrency mining, or even cryptocurrencies or blockchain. There was no PR expert who was focused on blockchain who had served in the industry for a decade, even 5 years. There was no one like that who had worked in the industry before starting out into the PR side of things. So this strategic advice that was needed by a lot of firms like Bitmain was lacking. And that's why I decided to start my own firm. To put it simply, when you go to a PR firm, and if you're an automotive company, there will be an expert who's worked decades in the industry, brings many years of experience from the industry. Same with aerospace, same with semiconductor, same with furniture, same with every other industry, because these industries have been around for a while. But when it comes to cryptocurrencies, there were no such experts or subject matter experts, even at the world's biggest PR firms. The only people who were claiming to be PR experts in cryptocurrency were those who had just entered the space in 2017 boom to help ICOs or blockchain projects get more publicity. And that was
not the most relevant work.
Yeah, which is fine, because that was also a need in the industry. So they were filling that need. So that's why I started out, to fill that gap.
Yeah,
and
sure.
So now our clients are institutional scale mining companies at this moment. They are mainly in the US, then Russia, then China. And we take, as you mentioned already, only a select few clients because we have a limit on how many clients we take at any point of time, so we can keep the kind of service quality we offer. And our clients are really satisfied with the services we offer, more than satisfied. And being on the other side of the desk not so long ago myself, I know that what we offer is much more than what any PR firm can offer. Because of my experience and network in the industry, we are not just offering public relations strategy counsel, but we are also offering advisory services, connecting them with other players, giving them some strategic advices on the business, like when to purchase machines, where to purchase from, procurement channels, what would help, and where it connects with public relations, etc. So we are well positioned to provide a more holistic strategic counsel than any PR firm can.
Yeah, your kind of unique experiences put you in an interesting spot. And mining we've seen a lot of momentum around kind of the industrialization size-wise of mining operations, in the US just in the last week or so, with DCG's news, and rumors of bigger stuff still to come. So it's a cool spot to be. And again, the experience of going from first marketing a small product to the West in terms of Bitmain's early mining hardware to their process of launching an IPO in Hong Kong, kind of closer to the end of your tenure. So it's an interesting set of experiences. Anything else can you give any more color on the customers you're dealing with now, and kind of how you're thinking about the growth and size of the industry? Like as we enter a new bull run and we essentially see maybe an order of magnitude growth in the industry and how mining plays into that. How are you thinking about kind of the growth of your customers specifically, just in size and capital, required to be one of these top couple players? What are you seeing there, and how are you thinking about those trends?
It's great that you bring it up, because this is drastically changing, and this year is probably the year where mining will see a big shift geographically from the east to the west. Now, what we are seeing is a lot of institutional capital is entering the mining space, and actually the bear market of the last 1 or 2 years, 2 years helped that. It propelled that, because before institutions who wanted to get exposure to blockchain and did not have that yet were torn between different options. And usually the most hyped blockchain projects, putting phones on the blockchain, putting diamonds on the blockchain, etc., putting everything on the blockchain, would get a lot of attention and even investments. But during the bear market, mining is what was still making money, was a time-tested model. And so a lot of the institutional capital funneled into mining during this time. And even a lot of talent in the last 3 years, a lot of talent moved from blockchain projects and ICOs to cryptocurrency mining. And now it's moving to DeFi as we speak. So mining benefited from the bear market in that way. It saw more institutional capital being pumped in from the West, and it got more industrialized, as you already mentioned. And recent announcements, like from DCG, Foundry, who is also one of the clients of our advisory services, the announcements are a result of that institutionalization of mining, where Foundry is trying to bring more transparency, more reliability of supply chains for mining companies in North America. And they're doing a great job at it. Like the recent announcement that we just helped Foundry with was with MicroBT, the second biggest manufacturer of mining machines, to establish an alternative supply chain based in Southeast Asia, which helps increase their reach in North America. And also bring more reliability, because now Foundry can secure ahead of time a lot of machines from MicroBT, and Foundry's clients can get reliable access, and on time to these machines, which wasn't the case before, because Bitmain was the only player in the industry, and there has been some issues at Bitmain, so customers have not been very happy with recent delays. So yeah, this is a good news. Another side effect of the institutionalization of mining.
For sure. And you touched on kind of that new supply chain there in terms of Southeast Asia to the US for MicroBT and Bitmain. I guess, one of its main advantages for the last couple of years had been its existing supply chain.
Yes.
And
yeah,
kind of the efficiency
also,
of its...
just for the record, Bitmain already has a supply chain in Southeast Asia, in Malaysia. So now MicroBT has one too. Right.
So Bitmain's had this operation in Malaysia where they've been able to avoid some of the tariffs and shipping things from China to the US. Now MicroBT is kind of on equal footing there, and still some internal drama at Bitmain, as you mentioned. Back, I guess to focus kind of first on kind of this landscape of hardware competition. So we have Bitmain, we have MicroBT, who's made a real push this year. Can you kind of lay out the rest of the competitive landscape there, how you're thinking about it developing into the next bull cycle? Anything else of note outside of those two?
So for semiconductor industry, it's the entry barrier is very high. So when you are taping out chips at these cutting edge process nodes like 8 nanometer or any sub 10 nanometer nodes, the entry barrier is so high because just taping out costs multiples of tens of millions of dollars, and then you are not even sure if you will get the allocation. You have to even try to get the allocation from the fab, which is the most competitive fab for now are TSMC and Samsung. And you're not sure if you will even get the allocation from their factory. So first, you're not certain of the results of these tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars that you spend in tape out because of the design of semiconductors and fundamentals. You're not sure of the yield of how the turnout will be. There are simulations, there are softwares to help you with that, but there are limitations when you work with say 5 nanometer or lower process nodes, because the softwares and simulations were based on higher process nodes. So they are not very reliable with that. So the yield is often uncertain. So you are betting with tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars first. Second, this is all assuming you get the allocation from these factories who have clients like Apple, NVIDIA, AMD, and so many other chip makers in line. So the entry barrier is really high, which makes it harder for other players to also compete. Having said that, MicroBT wasn't there about 2 years ago. No one thought much about MicroBT, and now it's the most formidable competitor to Bitmain. So you might see another player from maybe not China, maybe from the US emerge in the next 3 years, but it won't be before 2 or 3 years, because they will take some time to get where MicroBT and Bitmain already are.
Right.
Yeah. And the first chip is usually not very competitive. So it takes about 2 iterations or 2 generations more to become competitive with the leaders.
Yeah. So certainly one of the kind of biggest stories in mining is MicroBT's kind of growing market share there and the quality of its machines. How much of that is self-inflicted from Bitmain in terms of letting a competitor kind of get into its space? Do you have any other thoughts that you would share from the outside now on kind of Bitmain's kind of dynamics at Bitmain now, their prospects moving ahead?
Well, MicroBT's business has certainly benefited from all the internal issues at Bitmain. People or customers are not sure when they make orders whether they will be delivered or on time. So they look for alternatives, even if they're less efficient. So they are drawn to MicroBT. Having said that, there was a research report from BitMEX, and also it is in line with what my observations are from the industry. Most people are still, despite all these headaches that they have with placing orders with Bitmain and getting them on time or reliably, they still want to go with Bitmain because first, they're used to it. Second, it's way more efficient. When I say used to it, it's not just because they are used to working with Bitmain. It's because their infrastructure is adapted to Bitmain's machines. Their racks, everything they need infrastructure-wise is made for Bitmain's miners. So there's a cost moving on. And everyone wants the most efficient machines for long-term business growth. So they're not sure if the next generation from any other player will be more efficient than Bitmain's miners. So they want to be prepared with all this infrastructure for the future. And so they, despite all these problems and issues at Bitmain, they still prefer to go with Bitmain. But having said that, I don't know how long this will continue. Like, businesses want to move on. They want to continue making money. So if Bitmain's internal issues are not solved very soon, it might reach a point of no return where MicroBT gets a head start, which is hard to beat.
It's gonna be fascinating to watch it play out, and so many variables that you're touching on there that are playing into it. You also touched on kind of maybe this trend over this next bull cycle of hash power moving westward in some sense. You touched on a couple of large projects in the US that have launched. Need more color on that. I guess maybe first, we've heard a lot of rumors about kind of the rainy season in China and how it affected miners in Sichuan. Can you give some color to kind of the current state of mining in China? And then we can talk a little bit about how things may be migrating and distributing around the world. But kind of give us the layout of mining in China now and any difficulties that you've seen, or if they're overblown in the rainy season in Sichuan. And I guess the tax situation in some of these other northern provinces.
So the difficulties that you read about in the news are surely overblown because they are not new. Miners in China, despite what you may think from an outsider's perspective, are very used to doing business like this. Whatever happens, they've been doing business with it for 6-7 years now. And mining in China hasn't changed. It's the same as it has been. It's growing rapidly like it has always been. And miners in China are not thinking about moving out of China. They will continue making more data centers, buying more machines, which they are. However, the scenario in US has drastically changed in the last 1 or 2 years. Now because of the advent of institutional capital. Now you have institutions who are betting big on mining, and they are more competitive than Chinese miners in the sense that Chinese miners are not institutionally backed. They are more in it for a short term. Now, the definition of long-term changes when institutional capital starts coming in. A Chinese miner may be thinking for the next 1 year or maybe 2 years, but institutional players in the US who are entering the space are thinking much more long-term.
Certainly a DCG is one that's thinking long-term about Bitcoin.
And all the listed companies who are mining in North America, whether it's Riot, Core Scientific, or so many others, or Greenwich, which is a power plant, and also crypto mining hybrid, they are all thinking long-term because that's the way they are used to doing traditional investments too, which are based on long-term, more stability, low risks. And in China, because institutional capital cannot access mining because of legalities around it, you only have players who are looking at shorter time periods and are okay with higher risks. And that also limits how much money they can put in at a certain point of time, or how much commitment they can make when they're building a new mining farm. So that's slowed down the pace of growth in the mining business in China compared to the US.
That's interesting.
The fast growth in the US is also slowing down the growth in China because of the limited supply of machines. Now, North American mining machines are purchasing most of the machines, and most of the machines until next year are sold out already to North American companies. And miners in China cannot get their hands on machines anymore until at least the end of this year. So that's very interesting. Before it used to be opposite, where miners in China would secure these machines beforehand, and miners in US cannot get their hands on the machine because of various reasons. One of the reasons used to be lack of capital, which isn't the case anymore.
Yeah. Can you give any more color to that MicroBT and Foundry deal? Why they're getting kind of this access to that flow, kind of first dibs on it, and the value that they're adding in terms of MicroBT's supply chain, upfront money. What's kind of how are they getting in front of the line there, and how valuable is that in terms of positioning, against these smaller miners in China, and kind of just in that race to get miners? How does that play into it?
So Foundry has this vision to bring more transparency, reliability, and professionalize the mining business. Now, in line with this vision, they have secured through this partnership the first or earliest batches of the M30S miners that will be produced in the new Southeast Asian facility of MicroBT. And then they can provide their clients who are institutional scale mining businesses in North America, who either require capital or they require access to much more mining machines to grow their business. Now they can enter into more partnerships with these players and offer them more certain, reliable, timely delivery of miners. From this sense, it's a win-win for everyone. It's win-win for the industry, where mining businesses can, more reliably get mining machines and plan accordingly, which wasn't the case before.
Yeah. And so, you mentioned that their client also clients out of China and I believe in Russia. What are you seeing kind of trend wise in mining in kind of that more Eurasia region, Russia, Kazakhstan, places like this, and flows? I guess kind of continuing on the topic of how mining is going to be distributing, around the world over the next cycle. What are you seeing in that part of the world?
So in my view, Russia is highly underrated as a mining destination. It combines the best of both worlds, East and the West. So mining can offer you very competitive OpEx and CapEx comparative in comparison to China. They have electricity rates as low or even cheaper than China. And then it brings you more stability in terms of the regulatory environment of the West, which is a problem in China, where the governments are often changing, and there are so many cases about that. And China and Russia is very close to China, so the supply chains are not affected because of a lot of reasons, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's a trade war, and they also have great bilateral relations, these two countries. So Russia is very well positioned to be the next mining hotbed. But at the same time, there's more institutional capital in the US, and investors in the US feel not comfortable when they are investing in Russia because of just public relations, really. Russian mining facilities, the institutional scale ones, have this challenge to overcome, the PR challenge. And if they succeed at that, and then you might see even institutional capital from the US flowing into mining facilities in Russia. And then there are some other former Soviet countries that are coming up in the news as mining hotbeds these days, like Kazakhstan you mentioned. However, I'm not so bullish on such countries yet because they don't have the natural resources that can back the low-cost electricity in the long term. So they have non-renewable sources of energy right now, which are subsidized by the government to encourage mining at this stage. But then the policies may change, the government may change, because there are no natural resources backing renewable sources. So these things can change fast. So I'm not sure bullish on that, but Russia, especially the Siberian region, they have this surplus hydroelectric capacity, which was built during the Soviet times because it was a hub for aluminum production. It still is, probably produces about 6% of the world's aluminum comes from there, or even more. And this was because at that time, about 60% of the cost of production of aluminum used to depend on the price of electricity, or 60% of the cost was electricity cost. So naturally, aluminum smelters would be where you can find surplus and cheap electricity. And so during the Soviet Union, the government built these massive hydroelectric dams, some of which were the biggest in the world at that time. And they've already paid the costs off decades ago. And now it's just surplus electricity they're producing. It doesn't pollute the environment. It doesn't have emissions like other sources of energy used for mining elsewhere. It's way more sustainable. And looking at that, I think Russia is well positioned.
One of many Cold War policies still rippling through history. So good, great context for all that. Love it. Maybe back to, all right, we kind of touched on some of the kind of geographic distribution.
Another thing just to add here might be interesting for the viewers to know is, so even if the government wants to encourage mining, but they don't have the natural prerequisites for sustainable energy supply, like water resources, etc., that the Siberian region has. So they may give you free oil, but even if they give you free oil, the generators that produce energy from the oil cost a lot, and they have a 8 years life cycle, after which they need to be maintained or need to be serviced, which costs a lot of money. And so even if you have free fuel by the government, because the government just wants to make the country the next mining hub, you still have a huge cost because of this, the generation facilities, which are just new. They need to be paid off. Someone needs to pay the cost for the generation and the maintenance of these very expensive generators. So even with free fuel, it's not very competitive. That's something I learned from our clients. Our clients ran some numbers, and this was their conclusion, that even with free oil, you cannot compete with surplus hydroelectric power supply.
Mm-hmm. Lots of variables in play, and generally want those variables to be as stable, so you can kind of look forward as they can be. Mining pools. So we've seen kind of really a consolidation, or we've seen most mining pool operation has come out of China. Kind of a majority of the top 5, I would say, Chinese companies. How do you see that? How do you see that kind of playing out moving forward? Any thoughts just on kind of that mining pool space? Obviously, Bitmain had a couple under its umbrella while you were there.
The mining space, the mining pool space has changed drastically since I joined the space. When I joined, this pool called ghash.io, which was in partnership with cex.io. Maybe they were separate companies in the beginning, but then one of them acquired the other, so they became one. Ghash.io used to be the pool that had almost 50% of the hash rate, and no one dreamt of any other pool that would take over. And that's also that was also one of the criticisms of Bitcoin, and one of the reasons for supporting other altcoins at that time, like Ethereum, because Bitcoin was getting centralized under this one pool called ghash.io. And now no one's ever heard of that pool. Anyone who's joined the space in the last 2 years, they are not even familiar with this pool called ghash.io. It doesn't exist. Antpool emerged very strong when I joined Bitmain. It was already the leader. And while that was happening, Jihan, who's a cypherpunk himself inside in many ways, wanted to decentralize Bitcoin's hash rate, because he also saw a threat when one mining pool is so big. So he decided to have an open source mining pool with a separate team, and he started BTC.com. And then BTC.com became the #1 pool very soon, replacing Antpool, which was the top pool. And then 3 guys from BTC.com who were in its founding team, they left. They started a competing pool, and after a few years, their pool becomes the #1. And you don't have ghash.io doesn't exist. Antpool, which was #1, is #3. BTC.com is #2. And now there's F2 pool, which has always been around in the top 10, always, since a long time now. Now you have Poolin, this new pool that was founded by former BTC.com employees, and F2 pool competing for the top place. And you have BTC.com and Antpool in the top 5. So my point being, it's changing all the time. So it's not, I don't see it as a problem, because it would be a problem if if the same pools stayed on top. So that means there are some anti-competitive factors in place. There is some centralization. Maybe there are some entry barriers that cannot be overcome by new players, but none of that seems to be the case. And so it's always changing. I mean, the landscape of mining pools. And looking forward, first looking back, China is where most of the mining has always been since, not always, but since a very long time. So the pools were here because the pools want to serve their customers. If they are closer, they're in the same geographical region, it helps. It helps in terms of latencies, it helps in terms of customer support, it helps in terms of being able to meet in person as well, which they do. They have BD teams that go to these mining farms and meet them. So that is why you have most of the pools based in China. But as you see mining increasing elsewhere, you might also see pools coming up in these places, or you may see Chinese players setting up offices in other geographical regions to be closer to their new customers. So let's see how that plays out. Might even be a new pool that we've not heard about ever, doesn't exist yet, but might be the biggest in the next 1 year, the way it has been since so long.
Makes sense. And just super competitive vertical to be in, like everything we've been talking about, really.
There's something else that happened in the last 1 year, or this year specifically in pools, which is a lot of exchanges became competitive with pools. So before, pools were making were a good way to make profit because it's a software. Most of it is open source, thanks to bdc.com/Bitmain, open sourcing bdc.com's tech. So it's very easy for someone to start their pool and start generating revenue. And they were charging up to 4% of pool fees before. So it was very profitable business. But this year, because of the competition, especially after Binance also started their pool and other exchanges became competitive with fees, I will explain later how. So the fees have dropped from 4% to 2%, and they're going even lower. So that's changed how pools do business. Now, what pools are doing is they're trying to get some more downstream sources of income. So if they have a customer or a mining farm who's using their pool, now they are also trying to start wallets or other custodian services for this mining farm customer to save his mined Bitcoins, or to hedge his risks for the future using some financial products offered by this wallet. Now pools are focusing a lot on these add-on services or downstream services. And that is why these exchanges could offer almost zero fee for their pools, like Huobi, OKCoin, Binance, because they are more focused on the downstream services, which is the main business of exchanges. So yeah, this year we've seen the mining pool business totally change from being a profitable one to one that is more focused on competing in terms of financial products for the mining customers.
Yeah, that's a super interesting development. Good point there. And it's been pretty interesting to watch how fast the Huobi's and Binance pools have been able to kind of capture some share with some of those kind of entrenched advantages of already running wallets and exchange services and things like that. So super interesting development.
And so you have Poolin starting a lot of financial services for their customers to be competitive with the other exchange-owned pools. And you might see
some announcements
or
of
BDC.com
Poolin working with 3 Arrows and BlockFi.
Yeah, and BlockFi, yeah. And you might hear some announcements about BDC.com and Antpool forming some partnership with Matrixport to do the same, to stay competitive.
Yeah. All super interesting to keep an eye on. Back a little bit. Thanks for all the color and kind of analysis of what's happening in mining. A little bit to kind of your kind of other expertise, which is kind of the communication side, and what you're doing for your customers. Talk a little bit about how you're kind of seeing or thinking about crypto press, Bitcoin press versus traditional press, and kind of Chinese media versus Western media. Just give us some color for kind of how you think about those landscapes and kind of why that expertise that someone like y'all brings to the table is valuable there.
Now, crypto media is surely new compared to established press, which has been around for decades, if not centuries, which has evolved a lot over time. So crypto media is less mature there, but there are a lot of crypto outlets now that are expanding their teams and trying to become like the Bloombergs of the crypto space, and focusing on research and focusing on more in-depth articles, focusing on stories that answer the questions of investors, etc. So they're finding their niche, maturing more in the space, becoming more like traditional financial press, but for the crypto world, which is great to see. They're also generating more revenue, and with this revenue, they're able to hire professional writers or even attract some writers from mainstream press to write about crypto. So it's maturing fast. However, it has a long way to go to be the Bloombergs or the Economist or the Financial Times of the crypto space. Now, yeah. But on the other hand, a great thing about crypto press is the easiness of working with them. So for example, if one of our clients gets some articles out on them, or there's an announcement that they reported on, but there are some corrections to be made, or there's something they didn't get right, we can contact them, and within a few minutes, usually it's updated. The article is corrected. There's a disclosure to tell people that there was an error, and everything is settled very fast, which doesn't happen with mainstream press, with Bloomberg's or Financial Times or other established outlets. So there's also this advantage of being small for crypto press. Let's see if they can maintain this this agility and flexibility while they become bigger, like traditional press.
For sure. Yeah, I guess great insight, kind of overall on what's happening in mining, kind of the communication side of the business too. Close out with kind of a fun one. One recommendation. So you've kind of lived all over from India to Shenzhen to Beijing now. One recommendation can be a restaurant, cultural site for someone who is going to be visiting one of those places to make sure and see. Recommendation.
Well, there are some obvious ones when someone comes to Beijing, so I won't mention the most obvious ones. But I would surely recommend people to try the Hohai Lake, which is also where we met for the first time, John. There are some restaurants that have been working there since generations in the family. And they offer very good Beijing hot pot, and some of them also offer very good Peking duck. I suggest anyone who visits Beijing try them.
All right, good stuff. I still like that Russian Beijing duck place.
Yeah, you can hit up John if you want to know more about that.
Good stuff. That's the first place you took me for Beijing duck. But good stuff. Good stuff all around. Nishant, thanks for your time. Busy guy over there. Love seeing what you're doing, and keep it up.
Thank you for having me, John.
For sure. We'll catch up again.
Yep.